All right, mic test. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. We lost somebody. All right, we lost Don, but it's all good. We'll come on back. All right, so we're going to get started tonight. We're going over SSLVPN deployment methods. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. All right. So whenever we get done going through this, you guys should be able to show competency and the different ways on how to allow SSLVPN connections to flow through your FortiGate. Okay. All right. And also be able to better design your SSLVPN deployment. Okay. So whenever we go ahead and you guys are deploying SSLVPN, you have two options, right? You can enable SSLVPN, but you can access the SSLVPN either A, right, using web mode, or B, using tunnel mode, right? And again, both of them can build an SSLVPN connection, right? But the key thing is they do not support the same features, right? And so tunnel mode, right, they support mainly all the features, right? And so, and more specifically, it's basically you're on your laptop, there's no other application you can use, right? As soon as you log in with the client, you're as if you were on the private network you're trying to reach. Okay. And so, after you log in with the FortiClient VPN, boom, your web mode, right? You would be accessing SSLVPN through a browser, but you would be limited to what you can access, right? Here's what I mean, right? The admin that's configuring the SSLVPN deployment, right? They would enable certain things, right? Within web mode, say, hey, our end users can access RDP, they can access VNC, right? They can access SSH, right? But maybe the admin didn't enable HTTP, HTTPS, right? They didn't enable the other protocols that you can use to interact with different applications. Tunnel mode, all it requires is just a tunnel from that host to, of course, that FortiGate, and boom, you have you're not limited to limited number of protocols. You actually have access to everything. You can access the entire network. Okay. All right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You can enable, it's not one or the other. You can actually enable these both at the same time. Off the record, for deployment purposes and for troubleshooting purposes, I like to tell people, and it worked for me and some of my teammates in the past, is to enable both. Let's say you start having issues with SSLVPN, and maybe end users can't access, they cannot access some resources or what have you, or it's just not working. You can actually reach SSLVPN using web mode and see if you can access those same resources, right? And then you'll be able to look at and see, okay, is it something I'm not enabling in the firewall as far as traffic not being able to pass, and that's why I can't reach. That's why I can't reach my network, or is it XYZ, right? So it helps with troubleshooting. Okay. All right, let's keep going. But let's go ahead and closer look at web mode, right? Web mode, real simple, right? Just like I told you guys, the admin would configure it on the FortiGate and say, hey, whoever logs into the SSLVPN, I enabled these protocols, enabled these things, these bookmarks. Here's what you can access, right? And so whenever they get there, right, they would go ahead and maybe see a website. Maybe they'll go ahead and see, they'll see a couple of bookmarks that you configured. Basically, this website, right, SSLVPN portal, it acts as a proxy, right? Reverse proxy in a sense, to say, hey, whatever you want to access, I'm going to be the filler and get you to where you need to get to via a web browser using HTTPS. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. With this, right, there are some disadvantages using web mode, right? All the interaction with the internal network must be done through the browser, right? So Mykedia couldn't right? She couldn't do other things like interact with, maybe try to reach a shared drive on her local computer that's maybe mapped to her computer, right? That sits on the remote server. She can't do that using web mode. It would have to be configured and available on the SSLVPN portal and then reach that shared drive, right? And even then, it's not local. It's, again, through HTTPS using that web browser, okay? All right. Second is, right, we're using HTTPS, right? God willing, HTTPS, right? Has a gateway mechanism, right? And maybe, right, there's a hindrance in place. Maybe HTTPS is not working. Maybe the ISP is having issues or what have you. Some protocols are just being blocked by maybe the router, right? It's not actually being fully tunneled. HTTPS being the primary source of communication, right? If HTTPS stopped working, right, maybe certificate issue, what have you, you won't be able to access the portal. And so now you can't access the resources. So there's a couple of disadvantages whenever using web mode. Again, it has its uses. I've seen organizations, I've worked in organizations that actually use web mode. It's great. Some people love it, right? But there's some disadvantages, but the setup is it's great, right? Again, the goal here is to, with SSLVPN, is to access the internal network resources. Okay. Question?
I do, but
Yes.
I think I got the answer to it, I'm assuming.
Go ahead and shoot.
To access well mode, would you just like use the WAN interface, like the IP for the WAN interface to access it on web mode?
Don, that was a good question. That was a good question. So you would, again, just like you said, go into your browser, put in HTTPS, right? :/ forward slashes, right? And then type in either the fully qualified domain name, maybe you have a cert set up, you have maybe a DNS entry using like Cloudflare or GoDaddy, what have you. However you reach it, whether it be IP address or fully qualified domain name, you put that in a browser, and you'll get prompted with the SSLVPN screen. Now, right, I'm going to take a side step. Fortinet, whenever it'll tell you, whenever you're configuring SSLVPN, right, if you have enabled admin access to the Fortigate as well, if you're using the same protocol number 443, right, for admin access, along with SSLVPN portal access 443, right, Fortinet actually recommends that you change either one or the other, right? So you'd be able to segment the difference on accessing the firewall, right? We want our admin access to be different, so maybe you change the firewall port to be 4433, right? And then you keep, web mode to just be 443, right? Or vice versa, right? You flip it, but you always want to make sure you go ahead and change that, because you may have to educate your users to say, hey, put a port number or don't put a port number. It's automatic when you use 443. So you'd put that in your browser, right? In your address bar, and then you'll be prompted to this screen. It'll tell you to log in, as you guys can see right there. They'll log in with their credentials, however you have it set. Maybe you're doing external authentication, or maybe local authentication that's programmed on the firewall. As soon as they authenticate, boom, they'll go ahead. A quick connection launcher will pop up, and then you'll see the bookmarks, the connections, right, when what you'll have access to, right, and the different protocols you have access to, like HTTPS, FTP, RDP, SSH, or what have you.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep. It does.
Okay. Cool. Good question.
Okay.
All right. So tunnel mode, my favorite mode. All right. So tunnel mode, it is the second option outside of web mode to go ahead and to access resources using SSL VPN, right? Tunnel mode, you guys see it before. All it requires is you guys to have FortiClient installed on your host, maybe your PC, server, what have you, right? What'll happen in the background, and this is my favorite part, right? Because it's getting real techy. As soon as you install FortiClient, right? FortiClient is now going to create a network adapter called FortiSSL. Okay, so it's not much configuration you have to do as an admin on your side. They just have to go ahead and install FortiClient. FortiClient is going to do this in the background, right? And as soon as they install that, what the virtual adapter is going to do then, right? It's going to go ahead and whenever it connects to, they attempt a connection to connect to this FortiGate to go into tunnel mode. However you configured, your DHCP for your remote users, whenever they try to connect using SSLVPN, they're going to get an IP address, they're going to get that DNS information, they're going to get the suffix information if configured, right? They're going to get all those things configured in the background, okay? And then all traffic is going to then be encapsulated, because again, we're talking about a tunnel, right? If you guys ever went through a tunnel before, maybe you're driving through DC, maybe you're driving through New York or what have you. If you've been through a tunnel, you see, it has like a roof, a top area, so it's not, you don't see the sky. Everything is encapsulated. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. All that traffic encapsulated by SSL and TLS, right? God willing, it's TLS 3.0, right? I'm getting real nerdy right now, but that's what's going to happen in the background, okay? Right, so that's what's happening in the backdrop. So once you configure that, once they configure, right, they'll be able to access all the resources. There's no restrictions unless there's something configured on the firewall policy to where maybe Don has configured, hey, we're only going to allow X, Y, and Z. Typically, the SSLVPN policy, it's a southbound policy from outside in, right, into that network. Typically, it's giving access to the entire network, and you're just specifying the users, what have you. And of course, I know you guys remember us creating users or what have you and doing a firewall authentication. Okay, so once you do that, you're in, right? You're not restricted to if the admin configured, specific protocols, if the admin listed specific bookmarks for you, you're not limited to that. You're legit, a tunnel is created between that host and that private network you're trying to access. Okay. The biggest advantage of tunnel mode, right, over web mode is that after the VPN is established, right, any application that's running, right, can send traffic through that tunnel. Now, if you're a great engineer, right, you would look at everything, you would study everything, and you would see, do I want all my traffic, and this is where designing comes in, do I want, traffic that's just destined for that network to just go to the private network and use the adapter, right? Even my own personal internet traffic, right? Maybe Google and stuff like that, or YouTube, right? You can do that, right? Or do I want to do something called split tunneling, right? Where I have a tunnel for, trying to reach resources in the private network, right? But if I'm trying to get to destinations that are outside, right, that are outside of my private network, maybe it's on the web, right? It doesn't exist in my private network. The tunnel is going to split and say, hey, send this out their local network that they're on. Okay, so you have that option. The web mode, you do not, right? Okay, so you can choose how traffic flows and what have you. All right.
Yep.
Okay, and here's a quick look of how that traffic flow looks like, right? So again, based on how you configure the your SSLVPN settings, they'll go ahead, same thing, right? They'll get the FortiClient VPN client. They'll go ahead and authenticate. The FortiSSL virtual adapter create the tunnel. Boom, tunnel is created, and now they can go ahead and access resources. Simple enough.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, Don, and this was your question yesterday, and I love that you asked that question. So, tunnel mode, but with a FortiGate has a SSL VPN client, right? It can be done. right? So the FortiGate can be configured as an SSL VPN client using, right? I don't know if you guys ever saw it. If you guys have a FortiGate at home, check it out. You can use the SSL VPN tunnel interface type whenever you're configuring it. Okay. And I'm working on creating it in the lab, by the way, guys, so you guys can see that. Okay. I just don't have it ready now. All right. So
Okay.
with that FortiGate, right, whenever that connection is created, right, what's going to happen? Because remember, right, and I want you to stay with me now, right? I want you to think about the FortiGate has a client, not another FortiGate. Okay, so the FortiGate is just another PC, right, that's trying to connect to another FortiGate using SSL VPN. As soon as it connects, has a client to, right, to that gateway, right, or that firewall, that other firewall, it's going to do exactly what our PC does if it has 40 client installed. It is going to dynamically add routes, right, to certain subnets on that firewall, right? Is going to be pushed down to that, to the FortiGate that's acting as a client, and now it's going to know how to reach those resources on that private network, right? And so as long as you have layer 3 configured on this FortiGate that's going to act as a client, you can go ahead and reach that, right? And so a lot of people do this, right? Whenever they're setting up, right, high level now, whenever they're setting up hub and spoke topologies, right? Maybe a headquarters to several branches, okay? And so as soon as we go ahead, right, and of course the hub will be, right, be that SSL VPN server, right, and all the branches would be those SSL VPN clients, right, that are FortiGates. Okay, and so once that happens, right, exactly the same thing that's happening if you have Forti client installed on your piece and you're connecting to the and you're connecting to maybe a FortiGate, right? Right, those packets encrypted using ESP. Okay, so you have to be, you have to be careful here. ESP sometimes, depending on the ISP, right, it can be blocked, right? So you got to make sure, is it being allowed or what have you. Have to make sure, right? Certain UDP ports that are used in SSLVPN aren't being blocked. Maybe port 500 or port 4500. Make sure those aren't being blocked because by default they would, right? Some old ISPs do it. Don't ask me why. SSL VPNs, right? You guys know the MTU, right? The maximum transmission unit of an interface is 1500, right? And so, sometimes with packets traveling through a VPN tunnel, right, whether it be SSLVPN or IPsec, right, a lot of packets are going to be fragmented, right? With doing this option, right, fragments, though them being dropped, right, what can happen is, of course, it can go ahead and cause a lot of retransmissions. Well, with the SSL, with the FortiGate acting as an SSL VPN client, it'll go ahead and make sure that doesn't happen, right? And they'll go ahead and make sure it's a constant connection, right? So there's a lot of advantage. I know you probably never heard of it before because it's easier to just create an IPsec tunnel, but a lot of these things that happen using, IPsec tunneling or using just a router, right? These are the things, right? ESP packets being blocked, UDP ports, and of course, fragments being dropped. These are the things that a lot of people encounter, and it's crazy. I've encountered it. I believe earlier this month when I was setting up a new site, a lot of the legacy ISPs, they block some of these ports. Okay. So one option that you have in your tool belt, I say try it. If you do have 2 FortiGates at home, give it a shot. And of course it'll work out, right? Now some disadvantages, right? Good old certificate authority, right? If you're going to do this, you have to make sure you have an you have a correct cert that's on your firewall, right? So that so that clients can go ahead and connect, right? Make sure it's public, make sure it's authorized, it's installed. FortiGate, I know for a fact, uses Let's Encrypt. So make sure you have that in place so that your users can go ahead and connect, right? It's a trusted source. Let's Encrypt, it'll go ahead and renew those certs every 3 months, 3 to 4 months. Boom, you're good. So make sure that's in place, right? Along with, of course, the second bullet point, SSLVPN client FortiGate users use PSK and PKI, right? Client certificate to authenticate. So again, a lot of things with certificates here. And the certificates, if you guys don't know, they are used to go ahead and authenticate trusted resources on the untrusted public networks, aka the internet. Okay, so if you guys go to website, you try to connect to maybe FortiGates or what have you that doesn't have a proper cert. If it's your organization, do what you want to do at your own discretion, but that is not safe. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But know if you're doing tunnel mode using FortiGate as a client, you will have to do so. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is self-explanatory. I'm not going to go ahead and go through it. Well, maybe I will. So yeah, I think this is important. So how does the tunnel work, right? How does tunnel mode work when the FortiGate is configured as a client, right? So step one, right? We'll see the FortiGate will go ahead and connect to the SSLVPN server, right? Which is, of course, aka that other FortiGate, right? The headquarters FortiGate, right? That hub, okay? And so it'll connect to it using, SSL or TLS, right? Using those protocols, right? So once that FortiGate, right? That FortiGate will go ahead and it'll share those credentials, right? It'll authenticate. Once it does that, it'll share that pre-shared key, right? Maybe it's a local account that maybe Don created, right? Or an account that's maybe on a server that Makivia set up, right? Instead of Radius or LDAP or what have you. Either way, right? It'll have that in place, and we also have our they'll have their public key infrastructure in place, right? For certificates or what have you. Then it would authenticate the users, right? And once they are authenticated, right, you go ahead and go to step 3, right? The server FortiGate establishes then that tunnel, right, and starts negotiations, right, and assigns an IP address, right? Again, assigns an IP address. I told you guys the SSL client, right? That's our FortiGate, right? Is a host. So it's going to get assigned an IP address on its virtual network adapter, right? And so once it gets that, right, now this is going to be the source IP address for this FortiGate, okay? For the entire connection, right? If the connection goes down, it will lose that IP address, right? And so step 4, last but not least, right? Yahtzee, right? Now we can go ahead and access the resources. We have all the routes that we need. God willing, if it's configured right. And now we have our tunnel. Okay. Again, that tunnel, it's encrypting all of that traffic that's passing through. Right. So that is exactly what's happening. Right. So that's about it. That's how it looks passing through. Any questions?
For me.
Okay. All right.
I have a question. I have a
For sure.
question. Basing on the the I guess the graphic or topology we have here, right? How in this instance, right?
Mhm.
How would a hub and spoke framework would actually work here? Would that still be achieved through, I guess, the same interface, or would the interface, or would there be done through different interfaces on the I guess would be the server side or the client side? I don't know if that makes any sense on what I just asked.
It does not. I'm sorry. Say it again.
Okay, so if I want to ultimately if I wanted to do a hub and spoke, right? And I'm doing different okay, I'm doing a hub and spoke and I want to create different site to sites through the hub and spoke topology using, I would say the SSL VPN client. Would I be able to do that?
Hold on. I'm not getting your question. Say it again.
Okay. So if I want to create, all right, so if I want to create different site to site tunnels
Mhm.
using the SSL VPN client, would I be able to do that?
Using the same SSL VPN client on what side? The branch spoke side or the HQ side? The hub side.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so it'll be the HQ side, I would say.
Oh well, the HQ side is the SSL VPN server, so it's going to have multiple connections regardless.
Okay.
Because again, it's that core resource.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. My favorite thing whenever we're doing tunnel mode in SSL VPN, split tunneling. Right? So let's talk about it, right? So with split tunneling disabled, right? All traffic, right, for Don's end users, right, that connect to SSL VPN, right, that source, right, because you guys know I love source and destination, that source from the end users' computers, right, including internet traffic. So if they got to go to YouTube, Amazon, or what have you, is routed, right, across the SSL VPN tunnel. It's not sent to the internet to go directly there. It's sent through the SSL VPN tunnel, right, to that FortiGate. Then, right, the FortiGate is then going to go ahead and route that traffic out to the internet. Okay. All right. And so you guys are probably thinking, well, that's a lot of steps. It is, right? But with security is added complexity, right? That's what comes with security. So Don sets that up, right? What him and Mykevia can do on their firewall is that they can actually mitigate traffic that's flowing through for the end users, right? To the internet, right? So they can set up several UTMs, maybe a web filter, they can set up antivirus and what have you. So they're mitigating all traffic that's passing through. Okay. Right. But again, with that, there's a lot of things that'll be sacrificed, right? It'll add more latency to that traffic that's trying to get to that destination, right? And it's going to increase, right, bandwidth usage, right? Maybe you have maybe you have a 50 meg or 100 meg pipe, right? If you go ahead and put that in, if you have more than 100 users, hey, self-explanatory, right? You need to go ahead and make sure you plan your network properly if you're going to do that. Because if you have split tunneling disabled, it's going to increase that bandwidth usage, right? Okay. All right. So we got that set up. We talked about it. What about if we enable split tunneling? Well, we talked about that before. Traffic that is destined, right, to reach resources that are on a separate private network, it will be sent there. But traffic that is not destined, right? So maybe YouTube, Amazon, or what have you, that's not destined for that private network that you connected to, is going to send it directly out your local gateway and send it directly to that website. All right. Okay. Does that make sense?
So, question. So when it says it's going to go unencrypted, like the unencrypted route,
Mm-hmm.
is that just saying that
It's not going through a
the
tunnel.
tunnel at all?
Nope. Not going through the tunnel. So traffic that's not destined to that private network will not be encrypted.
Okay.
It'll just use the direct internet, right? And of course, same thing, right? On the flip side, if you do enable split tunneling, it'll conserve bandwidth, right? For your maybe your SSLVPN server, right? That they're trying to go ahead and reach out to, right? And we can alleviate bottlenecks, right? Because what happens whenever a interface, right, reaches its limits, right, as far as how much traffic it can pass through, it will start to drop packets. Okay. All right, and it will use its best effort to go ahead and pass traffic through. You don't want to do that, right? Because then you'll have disconnects, you'll have end users complaining that they're getting disconnected from resources, what have you. You don't want that to happen. So just keep that in mind, right? And know what split tunneling is. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. With that being said, time for good old quiz questions. So, question 1. A web mode SSL VPN user connects to a remote web server. What is the source IP address of the HTTP request the web server receives? Is it A, the remote user's IP address, or is it B, the FortiGate device internal IP address? And this is a tough one.
B.
B.
B. Okay. You guys are correct. All right. Question 2. Which statement about tunnel mode SSL VPN is correct? Is A, it supports split tunneling, or B, it requires bookmarks?
It's A.
A.
Hey,
There we go. All right. Question 3, last one. A web mode SSL VPN user uses blank to access internal network resources. Is it A, bookmarks, or B, for the client?
Bookmarks.
Bookmarks,
Hey.
yeah, because it's on the web.
There we go. All right, guys. Good stuff. I will go ahead and get this posted shortly. I know, of course, going through theory is it can be draining, but our next section, configuring SSLVPN, that will be the last theory that we go through, and then we'll take a little break and we're going to start doing some labs. Okay.
Yep.
All right, guys.
Awesome.
I will see you then.
That's good.